So welcome everyone. This is Beyond Next. It's our episode for Altimetrik's explorations of digital ecosystem, digital business, and how digital engineering, AI, and data come together to form fantastic solutions and improve people's lives. Today we have our first guest. Thank you for coming, Jay Larson.
Inviting me. Appreciate it.
Jay Larson is our guest, and again, founder and CEO of Asha.io. Also a phenomenal adventurer and founder of multiple other ventures as well. So it's a pleasure to have you, Jay. Thank you for accepting the invite, and again, great having you. So love to understanding a little bit on your life story. You just touched on the fact that you spent some of your childhood in Europe. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your childhood, how that was, because it sounds, I know about it, but I'd love for our audience, our guests, to learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, grew up initially in California, and then at age 4, my dad's work took us to Europe. So I spent 4 years in Paris.
Yeah.
Then he went to work for Ross Perot's IT company in London. So they were doing a lot of consulting, IT type consulting, working with big banks and other types of institutions across Europe to roll out some of the digitization efforts then. And spent 5 years in the UK before coming back to the US for high school. And I guess my dad obviously had the adventure bug in him. He'd studied a master's in international management despite having been raised mostly on a farm. He'd gotten into computers through punch cards and automating different jobs that he had, which is a different story. But I mean, even his grandfather actually, who was born in the US in the 1800s, owned a small newspaper in Washington State, and ended up selling that and then moving to Mexico to learn how to build printing presses, and then moved to Asia. And so my grandmother was actually born in Singapore, and my grandfather built these printing presses, taught local people how to run them, and then would move to somewhere else in China, for example, and build printing press there, teach people how to run them. A lot of educational materials and biblical related materials.
That's awesome.
And so I think that adventure bug, apart from the fact, of course, that a lot of Americans have this adventure bug anyway, having chosen for the most part to come here at some point. But I like to think, I didn't actually realize my great-grandfather did this, but I moved to Africa, to Kenya, about 12 years ago, initially setting up offline computer hubs. So we built a custom operating system that had all this video content and tools on it, because free learning, online learning, if it costs a lot of money just to download it.
Yeah.
So oftentimes one of these video courses might be more than a family makes in a week.
Yeah.
So by setting up these offline computer hubs, we shrunk the cost down to the cost of electricity effectively. It also had an advantage of shutting out a lot of the other distracting parts of the internet.
Got it.
So you could just focus on learning. And so I realized, I guess, as I was talking to my aunt more about my great-grandfather, that's a very similar path. The cutting edge technology back in the 1910s was printing presses, and so we, in a way, I guess, inadvertently followed in that footstep. But spent a few years there. So we initially pivoted from the offline computer on a hard drive to these self-managing training institutions that were software and content supported. But we trained young people in tech skills, design skills, entrepreneurship skills, had people go on to work in some of the top tech companies in Nairobi, become online freelancers and support their families through remote work. Several even went off and launched their own tech businesses. So one of my proudest moments was when one of the young women, Jackie, who had joined us at age 19 for the first training, we then trained her to be a teacher. That was kind of how our model worked. We trained people. We trained some of them to be teachers.
And then they became the teachers themselves.
And then became the teachers themselves, yeah. And then they did work for clients. And so building websites, human-centered design research, We did a great market research project for the government of Norway and a Norwegian solar tech company, interviewing people all across Kenya on like how they use mobile payments and how they do group savings. We can talk about that a little bit more later. If you want.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, Jackie was part of that team that actually did that project. And after 4 years with us, she was getting a little bit lost, so I recommended that she go apply to this tech accelerator, which was the top one in Africa at the time. They picked 12 people from 5 countries, so 60 people total. And she got in, which was great. She was the only person without a college degree
Nice.
to get into that program. Even though they didn't require it, there's often like a link between having been to college and having the confidence for the interviews.
Of course.
And then a year later, she called me up really excited. She won $100,000 for her own tech startup,
Very good.
which was an ag tech startup, agriculture focused. And, so yeah, that really excites me, seeing people do well within working for me, building up those skills, and then even going on to the next part of their career. I really believe that like companies create their own culture, and of course you have to get things done, you have to be productive. But you have to put in these right values, and then the values then turn into culture, and that helps people develop. And as long as they're developing, they'll either stay with you or move on to other great things.
That's awesome. What made you move to Kenya? And I'm of course the entrepreneurial and adventurer in you probably drove you there. But what clicked in your head to say, I'm just going to go to Kenya and do this? What drove you to do that?
Well, a lot of things, but the thing where I decided, and this is going to sound very stereotypical techie now, but
yeah, sure. This is a stereotypical podcast. Let's go.
When I was in my early 20s, I'd already left the U.S. for reasons I can discuss, but I had been a teacher for a year in Southeast Asia. And I was at the time quite angry, might be one word, at the way that things were evolving. I'd studied my undergrad at Duke, so initially studying engineering, ended up with a degree in economics, focusing on history of markets. And it seemed to me that the way that the education system and the economy was going was not in the best interests of everybody. Learning wasn't really focused as much on work. I had been in high school, I'd been a rough carpenter during my summers. So the rough carpenter is the framing part of the houses, and really strong apprenticeship style learning. Like the first day on the job, they teach you how to stack wood, and you think that's easy, but actually like you have to really properly line things up. Similar to coding, like, you can't leave a semicolon there or leave a semicolon out. So you have to really line these up properly, and then from there you learn how to put together a sawhorse, which is actually more fun than it sounds with a nail gun. So you're there 16, 17, just like... And that type of structured learning with an output, where you start out with this sort of pile of wood and an idea, the architect's giving you a drawing, and then you're learning on the job, working with people. That learning experience to me was a lot more sort of meaningful and interesting than the way that college was done.
Got it.
And so anyway, I left the U.S. And did this teaching, and then this is the typical techie. I went to a 10-day silent meditation retreat, a Buddhist meditation retreat in the jungle in southern Thailand, just to clear my head, and decided that one of the biggest ways that you can have a positive impact is to change this learning, to link it more with work. And in sub-Saharan Africa, you've got 1.1 billion people, average age of 18, which if you compare to like U.S. average age is like 38.
Of course.
Germany's up in the 40s. And so you have this young population, and I knew, and it's changing now in the U.S., but the way that the accreditors worked for higher education here, it's very difficult to come in with innovative models. You can do it, and the accreditors are changing. But for a lot of reasons, part of it is that the accreditors are run by the universities, and the universities are run by the professors. And the professors have certain ways they like to do things. They like to train people often to eventually become professors, for example. And it's difficult to change things. And in order to get funding from the government through Title IV, you have to be accredited. And there's certain rules that you have to follow, and it kind of blocks innovation. So Africa, a lot of young people, as long as you can offer something linked to jobs, people aren't going to put too much stress on it. So we were able to iterate very quickly. And we did these 3-month courses, which are now called boot camps, and iterated very quickly and got people into jobs. And so that was kind of why Africa. And then Kenya, I happen to have family on my mom's side, actually, who've lived there for now 25 years. So I'd visited before. I was also very interested, having focus on economics, on the future of money and digital money. And Kenya has M-Pesa, which is even for the last 20 years or so, you've been able to take even the old Nokia brick phone and turn it into a bank in the sense that you can send money effectively through text message to anyone.
Absolutely.
And so seeing that as a platform for innovation was quite interesting. And there was a lot of cool stuff going on, still is, in Kenya. But like one was a pay-as-you-go solar model. So you maybe live in the village and even a mud or wooden hut, and first thing you get is a cell phone. All around the world, everyone wants a cell phone. But then, of course, you want lights and electricity. And so this company, one of which we actually placed people into, the original one that I knew is called M-Copa Solar. There are now many companies doing this, but they basically give you a solar panel with 2 lights. So if you have like a 2-bedroom, you can string these lights out. And then a charging station for your mobile phone. So you put that on top of your house, and immediately you've got electricity. You can stop burning these like very dirty sources of light at night, and you have this light. And what happens is you send a text message, you send a payment, so maybe like 20 cents a day, or maybe even less. And after 6 months or so, you've paid off the solar panel. So they lend it to you, and then they pay it off.
It's back into the network, just basically, again, let's just take it back to the US. It's like Tesla Power Brick or Powerwall, right? Where you can basically contribute back to the network and just get incentivized and paid for it.
Well, in this case, I don't think they've gotten quite there yet, but you basically make your payment from your phone.
Okay.
And then you keep your lights on.
Gotcha.
And if you don't make the payment, they send a text message to your solar panel and your lights switch off.
Okay. So it's not exactly a contribution model. It's more like, pay as you go, as you said.
Well, what's interesting from a finance standpoint is that you're effectively able to lend money to someone who has no credit score. And who, oftentimes, it's changing very quickly. Africa's developing very quickly thanks to digital technology. Of
course.
People might not have records even in a hospital necessarily. But
Yeah.
through this SIM card and this mobile phone, you can start to build a credit history for someone.
Of course.
As they pay off the panel, then they can get access to further credit.
And you just keep the logs, and that's your credit story.
Exactly.
And just your credit report over time. And so many digital business opportunities, particularly, I think, and of course, African continent, and just all over the economy, I think, stacked, to your point, is solar energy. Just managing money, sending payments, it's just as simple as that. Excuse me. So I guess a fascinating life story, and let's just move up a little bit on timelines. And you're in Kenya, you're developing all of these solutions, you're working on the what is this Tuna Panda Institute initiative? Tell us a little bit about it.
So Tuna Panda was the nonprofit social enterprise where we trained people in tech skills, trained some to be teachers, put the teachers to work, and then took a percentage of the money to keeping the training program free.
Got it.
So it was a nonprofit, and the goal was for it to be financially self-sustaining, a small training program run by young people, for young people. And we had a lot of success with that, but one of the continuous challenges we ran into was management. So how do you manage people, especially in a culture that's a little more hierarchical than here in the US? If you look at, there's a great book called Culture Map by Erin Meyer from INSEAD, a European business school. She teaches there.
I did read it.
Oh, you did read it?
I did my homework.
Okay, great. Did you like it?
Love it. Yeah, it's a great book. And the perspectives, I wanted to come back to that just in terms of cultural perspectives, because I love to explore, as we go through this journey, and particularly your life story, connecting the dots back to, how do you become an entrepreneur? What is that relationship? How is your culture, a blueprint map out to what you end up doing in a digital ecosystem, or how you build a company, or how you start up a business, and most importantly, how you deliver solutions, right? Whether it is through ownership or its own startup, or an enterprise like Altimetrik, which basically fancies itself in basically becoming an expert in every single business that we interact with, and try to become practitioners to deliver these digital ecosystems and digital products in very fast, quick-paced, bite-sized outcome approach, which is very interesting that you mentioned that, because again, it all correlates to that. If you go back to the basics, if you understand the basics, you overlay the business. And you execute with urgency and excellence.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very similar to in some of the books by Raj Vadakudi, the chairman of
absolutely.
Altimetrik.
Yes.
Where you talk about really working with the business team to understand the problem in depth.
Yes.
And then you metricate the solution
Yes.
and you drive these solutions. And entrepreneurship or any business is fundamentally about finding a real problem
Yes.
and solving it in a better way. And as you do, you build trust. And you build trust through, fundamentally, especially in the US, through delivering value and executing on tasks.
Yes.
As you noted from the book, from Culture Map, there's also cultures that are more relationship based.
Yes.
Where you need to sort of know someone and really get to know them.
To get somewhere, yes.
And so it's always a mix of that. Like, are you delivering the work in bite-sized chunks quickly? And are you like showing trust and showing that people can trust you and that they want to work with you?
Yeah.
And entrepreneurship, back to your question, is very much trying to do something. Innovative entrepreneurship, trying to do something that doesn't exist in the market yet.
Yes.
Or to serve, and this is important, or to serve a market that isn't adequately well served.
Yeah. Or do it. Maybe another one that I could add to that is doing it better.
Yep.
So disruptively better.
Yep.
That the incumbent becomes irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not so much replacing or finding something new, which it is, absolutely, right? If you do that, fantastic, even better.
Yep.
I think is the top three, right? It's something that doesn't exist that you created. Fantastic. You just created yourself an industry or a niche. Two, again, to your point, right? Solving a problem, very efficiently. But the third one for me is this completely disruptive way of doing something that's already been done and solving that problem faster, better, more economically, and then basically rendering irrelevant your competitors at the same time.
Yeah, and one of the examples to that note that was referenced in the book was Uber as an example, which taxis obviously existed. But this to me was an important one, having lived in Kenya, because in Kenya when I got there, basically a taxi driver was anyone with a car. They would sit, at the side of the street in a gas station. And whenever you're walking around, people are just yelling, taxi, taxi, taxi. And so their job was to sit there in their corner. They probably paid rent to the person who owned it. And they're just yelling taxi every day. And 90% of people are saying, nope, sorry, and walking on.
Yeah.
Uber hit the market. Uber hit the market and changed it completely. Another thing is that me as a customer, I used to have to keep 10 different taxi drivers' numbers in my phone because public transport stopped running at night. And you couldn't really walk around at night. And so you call someone and you say, hey, can you come pick me up? I'm here. They say, sure, yeah, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Half an hour later, you call like, hey, man, where are you? And it's, 5 minutes. 20 minutes later,
that sounds familiar to me. Were they in Midtown Manhattan by any chance?
And then often they'll just cancel. And you're stuck there. Yeah. And with Uber, it changed that completely because it meant that you had this little car that you could watch on the map.
Yeah.
And importantly, there was a trust-building mechanism. We talked earlier about trust and relationship.
Yeah.
There's this digital profile for the taxi driver, digital profile for the driver. And they've each built up a reputation by getting these ratings. And so you create a reason to do the right thing, for the driver to keep their car clean, for them to be polite. Also for the rider to be polite, because very often riders can be, if they're having a bad day, they can take it out on the taxi driver.
Yeah.
A little bit less likely to do that if you're going to get, a bad rating. And so that, to me, Uber actually is one of the things that changed Nairobi the most, because now you have far fewer people sitting on those corners.
Right.
When they log on, they're pretty sure they're going to get work. They go, instead of having to go from point A to point B and then back to point A, start yelling taxi again, they go from point A to point B and then the app sends them to point C. And I think that's like a great metaphor for how digital business can rethink things.
I agree.
And so you can have roadmaps for even an entire business and try to figure out, let's not just keep doing the same taxi driver model. Let's look at how do we want this business or this team to get from A to B? What are kind of the obstacles? And
another one to do that. Think about this A to B. You're just driving technically. You're just going from point A to point B. You're being taken somewhere. It's Uber.
Yep.
What's the deal?
Yep.
It's a taxi. What's the big deal?
Yep.
It's actually economic models, in my opinion, right? You're making that society that is using Uber now more productive. safer,
Yep.
more on point of what they need to be, because you're not wasting those 30 minutes. And, of course, you're creating a much more incentivized, on top of the actual business that you're creating with Uber itself,
Yep.
which in itself is like an economic engine, right, to all those participants. So to your point, the drivers, the users, the riders. Interestingly enough, I think if you like condensing it a little bit back into into the digital, and of course this is beyond next podcast, so we're gonna try to align this conversation a little bit onto what does Altimetrik do to understand that a business process that's been happening forever for 30 years. It's a financial advisory, just running their advisory shop, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, they're just continue to have these multi-million-dollar revenue streams or multi-billion-dollar revenue streams. Nothing wrong with it. What could possibly disrupt it, right? And then just waiting for the disruption to come or something to, take you out of business. I think that's exactly what Altimetrik does, right? We are trying to be beyond the next thing, around the corner, scan the horizon. Okay, what is it that you guys can be thinking about strategically, from a strategy standpoint, of course, at the business level, but also how do you prepare your digital ecosystem, your data systems, your data, lakes, your data ingestion patterns, your AI strategy? How do you put together all these agentic AI solutions to start working into the future solution? Again, it may be not something you can deploy tomorrow.
But and make sure, of course, that these agentic AI solutions can access the data they need, right?
Exactly.
Like you don't want data sitting in one silo and another piece of data in another silo. How do you create that, single source of truth or a space to actually run these agentic models on to deliver business value? I presume that's
the single source of truth. For folks in audience that are listening to this for the first time or not familiar with Altimetrik, maybe we could just chat a little bit about what that really means for us from an organization standpoint and from your own use case on both the usage perspective as well as from an industry point of view. For us, it's really kind of breaking the ivory towers. Just going to every single department, every single line of business, understanding how they work, understanding what your data sources are, who are your business users, who are their personas, how do you map that out? How do you create these user journeys that are comprehensive? That they don't just map what they do, but also how they do it. The point of, I'm yelling the taxi. Well, there is an equivalence of yelling taxis in the enterprise and digital business and banking and finance and insurance and pharma and life sciences and automotive. Every single industry has the yell the taxi metaphor. So we're finding the taxi yellers. And we're making them Uber riders at the very least, right? So again, not to just confound the metaphors, but that's really the bottom line. So it's trying to understand where can we get you guys more efficiency? How can we make your business even better? So we take some of these workflows, we map them out into these workflow orchestration engines, creating a single source of truth that really gives you access to that data as needed. Of course, with security controls, of course, with your access control lists and every single gatekeeper in place as the enterprise commands. But at the same time, if there's something that you can't access, and that's going to prevent me from building a solution for you, we're going to call it out and we're going to ask you, hey, can we put this into a proprietary, tokenized database where we can create a data residency, policy that goes and creates a pre-post token or something like a tokenized access system, so that only the source.
Can you
of the
explain
data.
more what you mean by the tokenized access system?
Yeah, of course. By simply creating a data source where you have PII data sitting into a central database, you may have actually. We actually have a client where we're helping them modernize their patient capabilities and their patient access to portals, whether it's laboratory results or patient health management solutions and things like that.
I think Estonia is a well-known example of having
Estonia has
digitized
everything is
their
digital
health system. And so if you have information with one doctor, you can give permission to another doctor.
Correct.
On some terms, like let this doctor access this part of my record, but not this part. Let them access it for 30 days or 5 days.
That's right. Yeah, it's basically giving access to a book, right? So you have a book. Your book equivalent is your health records or your EHR, and you're just giving them access to a chapter, and that basically this addresses the exact same problem, but in the digital ecosystem for some of the solutions that we built is this centralized data set where all of the PII is reconciled. You don't want to go and process an edge to give access to a lab. Analytical results on what's happening in Southeast Asia with a specific condition,
Yep.
So what we do is we take the data that is specific to the condition and strip it away from the PII, and then we can manipulate that on the edge, and then when you come back, we can actually have a token that maps that out to the single source of truth in the record of the patient. So it's a lot easier to kind of manipulate things on the edge, do whatever you need to do without having to mess up with the PII data. So there's multiple
the patient
strategies.
can trust
The
that their
patient
data
can
is not
trust
going
it.
to move around. The doctor will know that it's the most recent
Yeah.
type of information, and interesting.
And most importantly, the platforms themselves are now compliant. So some of these countries in Southeast Asia may have regulatory compliance
Yeah.
Rules that basically prevent you from moving the data outside of the country.
Yep.
So there's no cloud
Yep.
that you can use for that. So you actually have to use some of the on-prems, and so you
Yeah.
have to use the data residency.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting problem. Not exactly a straightforward solution. There's multiple strategies, but it's just one more example of finding an efficiency or inefficiencies,
Yep.
and then going after that, and then try to solve it with a digital product.
Yeah, and that data privacy piece is important. I mean, one of our clients, so Asha is the company I now run,
Yes.
Which is focused on really deep down, like how do you help people decide their own journey
Yeah.
in their career
Yeah.
and take that. But more importantly, how does a company make sure that people are delivering value within the company?
Yeah.
So you need to, I see these as two sides of the same coin. You have your company strategy, which needs to be clearly described, and then you break it down into strategic objectives, which are measured by KPIs.
Yeah.
And once the entire company understands the strategy and can drive the KPIs, you're able to have a flatter organization.
Yeah.
And then you bring people in, of course, to execute that strategy.
Yeah.
For people, especially top people, to stay motivated, they need to be continuously upskilling, feeling like they're getting better and learning new things. They need to feel a sense of relatedness to the company's mission and vision, and they need to have the right level of autonomy, right? No one likes being micromanaged. At the same time, if you let people off too far, they kind of start to feel lost. So there's a tension between that autonomy and that relatedness
Yes.
and that upskilling. So Asha basically helps companies set and track these goals in a transparent set of dashboards.
Yes.
And then we help people build a digital reputation based on actually achieving that strategy.
Love it.
So
Yeah.
kind of
Love
like
that
how-
digital reputation idea.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
So kind of like how we mentioned earlier, Uber, you get your reputation built up by number of rides you've done and your 5 stars.
Mm-hmm.
Within a company, you say, yeah, I'm going to do this role in a team and we're going to drive this KPI.
Yeah.
As you do that, and as you then have performance reviews, which we're increasingly supporting with AI, so
Yeah.
that AI itself can guide the manager to give better performance reviews.
Yeah.
You're able to really make sure you're getting the most out of people, and that people are getting the most out of their experience with the company. And so you use the fact that someone's building a reputation as a way to guide better behavior. Kind of like I mentioned with Uber. If you know you're getting rated on the cleanliness of your car, you're going to actually have a cleaner car. And it's more complex in a company.
Of course.
But it's the same kind of underlying principles. And one of our customers, we work, with enterprise customers. We've worked with small businesses. One of our customers that I'm really excited about working with is kind of redefining the future of higher education in the United States. So it's called Emeritus College, and it's a small college in West Virginia. They're in a beautiful Carnegie library building. Andrew Carnegie was one of the great industrialists who ended up building all these libraries that has, created really, I think, some of the intellectual foundation of America.
Of course.
And so they're in this they're in this building, but they're really looking to have a digital business approach to their school. So they want to have it not just everyone coming to a building, but people can learn on their own, especially if they're like single mothers or they're working, they can learn on their own time. But then they come together for these learning experiences, which is where a lot of real learning happens, is actually engaging with people.
Cool.
And we have this problem that we still have to resolve, which is, to your point of PII, personally identifiable information.
Yeah.
Is that there are regulations around what learning data can be shared with what contexts. But we're trying to build, like I talked before about this sort of CV or profile within a company.
Yeah.
We're trying to build that within their learning journey, but targeted towards them eventually getting jobs, targeted towards them being good citizens, towards developing the core values.
An ultimate outcome it's an outcome-based education model as opposed to a process-based education model. It looks like
Exactly.
There's an incentive that actually is productive for both the individual and society,
Yep.
as opposed to you just go through the process. And again, we don't need to talk about the college experience in the U.S.
Yep.
But there is a lot of I think modeling and enterprise value that is lacking at this point in the college education in the U.S. and most of Western civilizations, because I mean, I come from Europe. The model there is even more dysfunctional than it is here, but it's very similar, right? You just go through that experience without an actual ultimate outcome, where that single mom can actually learn on her own time, find her way through an outcome that's actually going to improve her life and be productive to society and economy. This is awesome.
I mean, we've probably had similar experiences. I have no complaints about my education, but you have the experience of coming in, with a couple other people your age to this giant auditorium with 100 people in it.
Yes.
And you're like sitting down trying to hear what the professor's talking about. He's kind of like, facing the whiteboard, and I've had great professors too. I don't want to say, I mean, there's great professors and great teachers out there, but in today's world, that part of the lecture can be delivered perhaps better on YouTube, certainly with better production value. And so, and the question that we're trying to look at is, how do you take this again, sort of digital first approach?
Yes.
To really creating a custom tailored education, one that focuses on first and foremost the students, or kind of like you talked about, creating these workflows, for example.
Yes.
What does the workflow for the student look like? How do we make it student first, and also tap into what industries need?
Yeah.
Because there's no reason why you can't use AI and data to dynamically update assignments or even full courses based on the overlap between, what is the objective of the course is one thing. What is the life goal and vision of the student is another thing.
Yeah.
And what are the needs of industries they might be interested in? And we've done a bit of experimentation with some leaders in education, looking at how you can use AI with custom rubrics on the back end to deliver these assessments. And instead of just asking a question from the textbook, the AI can look at what is Ignacio's interests? And if it's a physics assessment, it can pull out skiing because it knows that you recently did skiing. Whereas someone else who's interested in golf, they might have a golf example. And so then what the AI can also eventually do is look at previous assignments to loop in references to that, which is important because people don't just learn, most people don't have a photographic memory. They learn through spaced repetition. So you learn something, you review it the next day, then you review it a week later, then a month later. And if you do that, there's a good chance that you'll retain it.
And literally the connections in your brain happen because there's some sort of, impulses and electric impulses that are actually causing you to look for more of that, right? So you're basically feeding your brain with what you like. So to your point, relating experiences, things that you enjoy, your hobbies, things that motivate you, both intrinsically and extrinsically, things that are actually happening in your life that matter, can absolutely be a huge driver, in my opinion, to your point, just to make people more productive and more excited about learning whatever it is that you're doing. And I think that's a great, so let's just maybe transition this over to, we're talking about education, we're talking about Asha's role in the education space and how you guys track some of these areas. Let's move it over to the business world in terms of how do we set up, and again, I'd love for you to, kind of tell our audience, how do you connect the dots between business outcomes and digital worlds that, and digital ecosystems that are extremely complex these days. And AI is, taking some of that complexity down in terms of the actual making of those ecosystems. But in my opinion, it's an interesting thing that's happening in the industry for me. And I'll tie it back to the question. We're simplifying and superpowering engineers and designers and product owners and product managers to produce a lot more complexity in the back end and even in the front end. So lines of code have become now something that you were judiciously going after, looking at every single semicolon that was missing, or a class that was not composed correctly, or a inheritance model that was not being followed, or a data model that was not constructed properly, or some joint that was not working on the database. To now have all of these things perhaps completely automate in a couple of years.
Yep.
From a perspective of actually creating them. You still need to know the foundations, but AI is basically commoditized.
Yep.
The activity of writing foundational code. Now, you can still review it and look at it, and of course, I am suggesting to use AI to amplify your code output, not to supplant it or replace it.
Yeah.
But the point is, there's more complexity and more code being written now than ever, and it will probably exponentially grow because as AI agents start writing code all over the place, and vibe coding becomes literally universal.